Thank you for meeting me again. I have checked my material, and I'm more sure than ever that the King James Bible is the only true Bible.
I'm almost afraid to ask, but what sort of evidence do you have this time?
The Alexandrian manuscripts were changed by Origen because he was a Gnostic. He took things out of the Bible and published his Bible. Origen's Bible is the one Constantine used, and that's how things got corrupted by the Catholic Church. That's why they used the Apocrypha.
Those are some very confused ideas you have there. The Alexandrian manuscripts begin showing up in the 2nd century and Origen is from the 3rd century. Origen had some strange ideas and interpretations, but he was definitely not a Gnostic. The Gnostics thought the material world was created by a lesser being than God, and so they completely rejected the Old Testament as the work of that lesser being. Origen emphasized the connection between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and spent an extensive amount of time interpreting the Old Testament in light of the New Testament. What you called Origen's Bible was only a parallel Old Testament called the Hexapla. Origen's Hexapla consisted of a parallel Old Testament with 6 columns. One was the Hebrew, one was his Greek translation, one was the Septuagint, and the remaining 3 were other Greek translations of the Old Testament that were common at the time. He did this to show the differences between the Hebrew and Greek versions. He never did much with the New Testament books aside from complain that people were too sloppy and made mistakes copying them. The question of Alexandrian and Byzantine types only concerns the New Testament, so whatever Origen did with the Old Testament is irrelevant. Also, Origen rejected the Apocrypha as canonical. By the way, the post-Constantinian Church is the one that created the Byzantine text type, so that argument is absurd as well. And the Church in Rome used Latin texts, based on the Western textual type for their New Testament.
But the Alexandrian manuscripts used the Apocrypha and some heretical books in the New Testament.
This is the typical historical ignorance one gets from King James Onlyists. The Bibles used in Alexandria frequently contained the Apocrypha, but that is because the Apocrypha was used by the early church. Even those who did not recognize it as fully canonical saw it as good for instruction. And the Byzantine Bibles had the Apocrypha too, so there is no difference. As for the New Testament, some of the early New Testaments contained various books that are not part of the canon. But this is because the canon was not yet fully agreed upon. Most of the books we now know as canonical were accepted quickly, but 2 Peter, 2nd and 3rd John, the Epistle of Jude, and the Book of Revelation were debated for centuries before being fully accepted. Other books such as 1 Clement, the Shepherd of Hermas, and the Apocalypse of Peter were accepted in many places as canonical. It is not surprising that these books would show up in early Bibles. Also, they were not all condemned as you say, but only rejected as not being canonical, and 1 Clement was much revered as the work of an early Christian martyr.
But the King James uses the received text.
Received by whom? Desiderius Erasmus? Elsevier's publisher? The Church of England. It certainly isn't the Bible used by the Church throughout the first millennia and a half of its history. You will have to do better than an appeal to some vaguely defined received text.
But the King James uses the Textus Receptus, and that is the one accepted by the Reformation. They rejected the Alexandrian manuscripts.
The Reformers never saw the Alexandrian manuscripts. They were still in the libraries of monasteries in the Middle East. Even if they had seen them, the science of dating ancient texts had not developed, so there would have been no way of determining what were the best texts. It would have been a few against thousands. Of course, it turns out the thousands were from many centuries later.
But the new Bibles use Westcott and Hort, and they only used 2 manuscripts. Vaticanus was owned by the Catholic Church.
Whatever one thinks of the accuracy of the Westcott and Hort edition, it bears little on the question now. Newer Bibles use modern critical editions like Nestle-Aland that used hundreds of manuscripts from the earliest centuries in a weighted system to determine the best textual variations. Westcott and Hort were important in that they were the first to carefully consider the question, but their work has largely been superseded. As for Vaticanus being Catholic-owned, who do you think owned the manuscripts Erasmus used? Was he not Catholic? Did his critical version of the texts not get published prior to the Reformation? His work may have later been used by Protestants and occasional revisions made, but it is based on his work, and he died a loyal Catholic.
I don't know why you hate the King James Bible so much. You should keep an open mind.
I don't hate the King James Bible. I have great respect for the King James Bible, and I think its reputation is hurt by paranoid individuals who run around creating conspiracy theories to explain why people today are less comfortable reading a Bible written in Shakespearean English. As for keeping an open mind, I have no problem with others using the King James Bible, but it is those in the King James only movement who insist that everyone adopt their position despite the overwhelming evidence against it. If that is an open mind, then your mind has been left so open that brain cells have started leaking out of your ears.
Really? Where? Where?
Don't worry about it. You weren't using them anyway. Let's get something to eat.